Hi everyone, Charles from The Food People here. I hope you're all keeping safe and well. It's my great pleasure today to welcome Greg, founder, Jacqui, Sustainability Director, and Nev, UK Product Development Lead from EverGrain. We're going to be talking about spent grain, yes, but we're going to be talking about spent grain in the context of impact, of ESG. We're going to be talking about application, but also the big idea and the purpose behind EverGrain, who have recently been voted #1 most innovative company in the US by Fast Company. Welcome, Greg, Jacqui, Nev. It's great to have you here today.
Thanks for having us, Charles.
Great to be here.
At The Food People, we're very clear about why we do what we do. We're champions of change, driven every day by our intent to shift the future of food and drink by harnessing the power of trends. And this In Conversation With series is all about talking to people, businesses, brands, entrepreneurs across the spectrum of food and drink to find out more about why they do what they do and how in their way they're championing change and shifting the future of food and drink. Greg, Jacqui, Nev, it's brilliant to be speaking to you today. And I'd like to dive straight in, if I can, and ask, what is EverGrain?
Yeah. So EverGrain is a sustainable ingredients company. And perhaps what makes us a bit unique is that we repurpose barley that is left over from the beer brewing process and repurpose that into amazing ingredients that make plant-based products taste better, make them healthier and more sustainable.
This is a journey to see the potential in everything, where we never stand still. A round trip that starts with a single barley grain, that along with billions of others, has its sugar and starch removed to brew some of the most popular beers in the world. But the golden remainder, the saved grain, travels on. 1.4 million tons of it, to be precise. Enough to provide nutrition for more than 1 billion people. Transformed into world-class ingredients to enrich foods and drinks across the world and tackle some of today's nutritional and environmental challenges. These protein isolates, these nutritional flours and more transform products from the inside out, helping manufacturers keep up with the latest trends, making better breads, pastas, smoothies, even meat replacements. Because as our grains fuel more and more people across the globe, we continue to enhance, enrich and improve to look for potential in the dawn of every day, so the journey can start all over again. EverGrain.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm mind blown already. This podcast is obviously all about shifting the future of food and drink, and I'm really intrigued to know what's the deeper why behind EverGrain, and I guess fundamentally, what's the problem that it's solving?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you look at like plant-based products, I'm not sure about you, Charles, but I think maybe many of our consumers in our audience, when you go into the grocery store, you might find yourself sometimes disappointed by plant-based products, right? They may not taste as good as maybe an animal or a dairy version. They may not have like the same nutrition, or they may not have like the same sustainability. And when you ask food companies, hey, why is your product doesn't taste as good as it can be, right? Or why it doesn't have the same nutrition? And food companies will tell you that they're limited by the raw ingredients from which to choose. There are very few, remarkably few plant proteins and plant fibers at large scale. Yeah. And the deeper meaning behind EverGrain is that we're bringing an additional crop and protein and fiber source, which is largely barley, that is already grown for the beer brewing process. That is already at large scale, and we're bringing that to food companies and to the consumer to make these products taste better and make them healthier and more sustainable. And we can have a dramatic impact on the world by doing that.
And it sounds to me like the fact that it's a byproduct is actually a complete misnomer. It doesn't sound like a byproduct. It's something that has inherent value in it, right?
Yeah, exactly. So you use the term like spent grain. We call it brewers saved grain. Yeah. So okay. Just for the audience, just to make sure it's clear. So basically, barley goes into a brewery, and the brewers solubilize or remove the starch.
Yeah.
And then what's left over, the industry has been calling for like 100 years. They've been calling it brewers spent grain, but it's only spent from a brewer's perspective.
Yeah.
It's a misnomer, and it's a great source of protein and fiber that has traditionally been used over history for a lot of different purposes that we're capturing, and our technology is transforming that into amazing high protein and high fiber ingredients.
Wow.
And Charles, maybe just to add on there, your question was why EverGrain, but perhaps the better question is why not EverGrain?
Yeah.
You know, why do we live in a world where we have all these amazing resources, this amazing, you know, planet gives us these nutrients and you know, foods and beverages and things to nourish our bodies, but we take so much of that in the food processing sort of world and industry, and it goes to waste. Like, why is it like that today? You know, in a world of constraints, why do we not look at every element of the supply chain, identify where there is food waste, where the value is sitting, how we can extract that? And I mean, that the cherry on top here is that EverGrain does taste great. The EverPro product that comes out is fantastic tasting, and it's sustainable. But in the end of the day, you know, why not?
And I guess leading on from that, the next logical question is, how on earth did the idea come about in the first place, and how did you all get involved in this particular project?
Yeah, so it's an interesting story, and it doesn't originate from like one like aha moment. The journey of EverGrain actually starts nearly 10 years ago. Okay. And it starts from a very small team that was working on the byproduct of beer, which is brewers spent grain. And I was personally in this position to say, hey, Greg, you have a sales background, like go sell spent grain. And then I was new to the position. So you ask all the new person questions when you jump into a role. And I ask, okay, what am I selling? Well, you're selling, you know, spent grain. And then, you know, what's in it? Well, it's protein and fiber. And I'm like, well, protein and fiber sounds really, really good. And what do we do with it today? We sell it as animal feed. And when we sell it as animal feed, you know, we ship it sometimes hundreds of kilometers, you know, and it contains 80% moisture. So you're shipping water, right? And so it's not a very ideal situation today. It's circular today, which is great, but not ideal. And so we set out on a journey to see if we could do something better. And we met a brilliant food scientist at the University of College Cork in Ireland. Her name is Dr. Elke Arendt. And we asked her, like, hey, Elke, like, what do you think about this as a source of nutrition? And she's like, it's amazing. Like, and she gave us the confidence to really begin the journey. And she was a guiding light and a mentor, and helped us develop our first product, which is EverVita, which is a nutritional flour. And then from there, there's been hundreds of other contributors. It hasn't been the story of like one person or even one small team. It's really, EverGrain is really a movement behind, you know, with many companies and partners behind it.
Yeah. And has spent grain, I'm intrigued really as to, has spent grain always been seen as a waste or as a byproduct if we kind of look back in history, or is that not the case?
Yeah. So that's not the case. It actually was a source of inspiration. When you go back in time, you know, where, you know, civilization had to deal with constraints, or where constraints were significantly, you know, much more impactful. You find that breweries would actually capture that saved grain or save that grain, and then they would repurpose it as a flour into making high protein and high fiber breads. And those breads exist today at very small scale in many Scandinavian countries. Okay. But that offered us a source of inspiration. It's only been in the past, let's say 100 or 150 years, has like the brewing industry largely been using it as animal feed. Its original history or original was definitely as a nutritional flour into bread.
Yeah, I think that was my sort of first impression as well of the business when I joined, which was, you know, I come from a bakery background, so I've spent a lot of time in the industrial bakery as well as creative bakery as well. And the thought of throwing away part of the grain or not throwing it away, but the thought of not using all of the grain just seems absolutely bizarre to anyone that's worked in bakery, because we use everything, that we don't waste anything at all. And so it was great to, to hear the story, and also to think about, well, how could this element that's not been used in the beer be put back into the bread again, as it was hundreds of years ago. And that was the that was the first thing that I kind of came along and did, really, was started looking at the bakery world, started looking at the way that the flour could be used in bread making, but also in pastries and viennoiserie and all the other elements of bakery.
That's brilliant. I'm looking forward in a few minutes' time to talking to you about application. But before we talk about application, I'd like to know, obviously, Greg, you were involved in the formation and the founding of the business, and I'm really intrigued. This whole series is about, I guess, the deeper meaning and the purpose behind why people do what we do. And I'd like to come to each of you, actually, and just ask you, why personally EverGrain, why and how does it resonate with you? Why for you is this, and what EverGrain does, why is it important? I'll start with you, Greg, if that's okay.
Yeah. For me, I came out of college with an English and economics background, and I joined a very remarkable tech startup, and filled with just amazing people, and it was an amazing journey. But as I look back on that experience, I asked myself, like, what good did that software do? And I really looked for that deeper meaning. And in my career at AB InBev, I had the opportunity to lead sustainability for the company.
Okay.
And I developed a really deep understanding of the world's problems, and specifically around the food supply chain, and the role and the importance of food supply chain in either creating problems or solving these solving the world's problems. And from there, I was really just deeply impacted by that. And I felt that, in my career, it was my obligation to help. And when the ideas around EverGrain, or the movement of EverGrain, came about, I viewed it as kind of, my duty and to play a very small part in a massive role to make the world a better place.
Yeah. Okay. No, I'm sure many of the people listening today they're in that situation. They're in food and drink, and I'm certain that resonates with many of the audience. Can I ask the same question to Jacqui and Nev? Jacqui, maybe we can start with yourself. How does it resonate with you personally?
Yeah, absolutely. So Charles, it's similar to Greg's let's say experience or background, in the sense that I also came from a sustainability background in the same team as Greg, in fact, in the AB InBev business, taking care of sustainability for Europe. And what struck me in that role was just the scale and the impact that a food or beverage company has. Mm-hmm. And then, the sustainability team was sort of there, running behind the sales team, running behind the supply team, trying to fix this infrastructure, this system that had been established over hundreds of years. Whereas EverGrain is in a similar situation in terms of food and beverage, but we're creating that system which is inherently sustainable right up front. Yeah. So every time that, I talk to yourself, I talk to a customer, I talk to a partner, yeah. You're not in a sales role or in an operational role. You're doing sustainability from whatever seat that you are in the business. And I think that is just a phenomenal future blueprint for business, that we can create something that can hopefully be an inspiration for others, and really embed sustainability at the heart of it all.
Yeah, no, completely. Yeah, feel that when you talk in that way, you can definitely see it is if only, and perhaps when only business and food and drink, and even beyond food and drink, can take that approach to business, perhaps a future blueprint. Nev, really intrigued to get your perspective on that. I spoke to you not long after you began working with EverGrain, and you were super excited in a way that I've not heard you speak ever before. So what's your spin on your angle on that question of how does EverGrain resonate with you?
Yeah, I think the thing for me is, I was brought up in a farming kind of community on a farm in Cornwall, not too far away from you, and we hate waste. We just we don't waste anything. You know, I remember my granddad used to get really upset if he saw someone peeling an apple, because you know the work that's gone into it, and you know the kind of the effort that someone's put into that to make it absolutely perfect, and anything that's thrown away just seems crazy. So if there is anything that can't genuinely be used, it goes into compost. And that compost goes into growing the soil, as he used to say, but growing the next kind of batch of apples the next year. And you know, that's something I do myself. You know, I grow about 30% of what we eat as a family, and everything that's not used goes into some big compost bins and is reused again. So I think what really appealed to me was, you know, any opportunity to reduce waste and to make waste. And it's not waste, of course, and I keep saying waste, but it's, you know, this is a really valuable thing. It's not worthless. It's got very, very high worth. And I think realizing that worth is what really kind of attracted me to the business, and the way that it could be used, the way it could be beneficial as well. So not just from a kind of, you know, using something which has been discarded, but genuinely making those products more nutritious as well. And that's the most important thing, I think, is that it should never be regarded as this kind of side stream. It's all about improving nutrition, and that's the number one thing that we talk about, is nutrition, not not anything else. That's the first thing we need to talk about, is how we can improve fiber levels, how we can improve
nutritional density. Yeah, absolutely. And listening to you all speak there actually really chimes with somebody who I know that you know, who spoke at one of our summits a number of years ago, Doug McMaster. That, you know, I can hear elements, you know, coming through that, you know, he and his pioneering thinking in the culinary universe absolutely chimes with what you're all saying. Sorry,
I mean, Doug is a great supporter of ours as well. So we've had a lot of conversations with Doug. We've been to his restaurant a couple of times. He's fascinated by the fact that we're not just talking about converting small amounts of what's regarded as waste at the moment, but huge amounts, you know, and I think that's a different scale. So that's something that he's also really engaged with as well.
Yeah. When you talk about EverGrain as a business, do you see it as a, you know, is it a big idea? Is it a business, or is it a movement? Even it feels bigger than business, right?
Yeah, Charles, I hear statistics of that 25% of all incoming food in a food processing facility goes to waste, right? And when you hear statistics like that, it says that, boy, there's a lot of opportunity. And so for me, EverGrain is just is an example, a case study, and maybe a source of hopefully of inspiration for many listening to this podcast and others around the world, that they can go tackle some of these like food waste challenges, right? Yeah. And if EverGrain can do it, then you can do it. And so for me, yeah, the mission, the purpose behind EverGrain is certainly transcends just an individual company, right? It's much more of a movement.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Charles, and there's unfortunately it's not quite yet in the UK, but it is coming, something called the upcycled certification. And upcycling for me is really let's say the unifying word that brings us all together. There's more than 200 upcycle certified foods or ingredients currently in the US and Canada mostly. But what that word means is more than recycling. I think everybody knows about like reduce, reuse, recycle. Yeah. But when you talk about upcycling, you're actually at the intersection of innovation and sustainability. Yeah. So you're taking something that requires effort to transform, because of course, if it didn't require effort, somebody would have done it before. Yeah. And that is now unifying 200 food and beverage products and ingredients in the US. And basically that grew from a base of like 10 to 200 in less than a year.
Wow.
So I am confident that as soon as that comes over to the EU, there are plans for that to move to the EU and UK later this year and into 2023, that hopefully people can start to get involved and start to see that logo and certification popping up over there too.
Absolutely. I mean, I was aware of the launch of that certification, but I hadn't appreciated that it had grown in such scale over a period of 12 months. That's really exciting. Can we talk, and Nev, you touched on it a few moments ago, actually. I'm sitting here thinking, and I'm certain those listening to the podcast will be thinking There'll be a lot of what and how people listening, and therefore immediately takes you to application. So can you just bring to life for us, and you touched on bakery and viennoiserie, and it'd be great if you can elaborate a little bit on that, but also give us a sense of what other applications are for EverGrain.
Yeah, I think first and foremost is also sports nutrition as well. And that fits into lots of different categories now. So it's not just about your kind of bodybuilders and kind of gym addicts, I guess. There's a bigger section now, which is about lifestyle. And I think this is particularly kind of true post-pandemic, where a lot of people started cycling more, they started walking more, they started interacting with the kind of nature around them more. And I think that, that generated an awareness that, protein is important in that mix. So every time we exercise, we have muscle which is damaged for the good, for the greater good, but it's damaged and it needs to be repaired again. And that's where protein comes in. And we have a protein which is fantastic for, in that sense. It contains all the essential amino acids. It pairs perfectly with pea protein as well to create a really good amino acid profile. But it's also highly sustainable. So again, that interaction with nature is really important, and that kind of lifestyle sector is a big target for us. But also, one of the first things I kind of looked when I first looked at the product, it's not the most attractive looking flour you've ever seen. As a baker, you look at it and you think it looks like, sort of like a brown, fibrous kind of mix. And I think that what inspired me as well was to take that and turn it into something which was beautiful, which was taking something which was worthless and making it highly valuable. And I think, I kind of name dropped perfectly there with Doug McMaster. Hopefully he's watching this as well. But there's a number of other chefs that we've engaged with as well, going from the Manoir Cat Saison with Benoit Blin, Chantel Nicholson, Apricity, who have also realized the potential of the flour in a way that it can be turned into beautiful Michelin-star food. And it doesn't really matter that some people might have called it waste in the past. It's not that at all. It's something which can be turned into gold. And that kind of is very inspirational. So I think two sides is a serious sports nutrition product, which is really good for muscle recovery and really aids exercise and helps with exercise, also sustainable. And secondly, something which can be turned into great bakery products, great meals as well, great sauces and so on, which can be which really help, particularly in the plant-based arena.
Can you give sense? You talked about creating beautiful products, and that. Can you give some sense of what those guys, what was Chantel? How might she use that in kind of application? Is that in more of the bakery application, or is that in other more creative ways?
Yeah, I think a lot of the chefs touch on the beer background. So we had some kind of conversations around creating a coating around roasted kind of peanuts and things like that. So kind of crunchy coating, which I heard went well as well. In terms of the Manoir, it was all about bakery, so using the products in viennoiserie and breads. Probably the main person who used it is way back about 6 months ago, a chef in Brussels, whose name has now escaped me, so that's not good, but a chef in Brussels who's a Michelin star chef, who we worked really closely, and he also kind of was quite inspired by the story behind the flour, and that actually led him to be more creative. So in his words, he took something which was interesting to him and had a great story behind it, but also inspired him to think about ways in which it could be used as well. And then those bakery items that he developed, so breads, some kind of viennoise biscuits and so on, were then shown at a big food hall in Brussels called Grand Maritime, which is the biggest food market in Europe. And as part of the opening ceremony, our ingredients were in those products. Giovanni Bruno, sorry, yeah. Giovanni Bruno. It's been a while, but yeah.
I think the thing that comes through to me loud and clear, we're talking about its application in sports nutrition and bakery and sauces and meals and pastas, and I'm assuming can be used in meat analogs and all of this. Is the versatility around the application of products. It just sounds immense to me.
Yeah, and I think what I've really realized from those chefs as well is the way that creativity stems from having a small number of ingredients. We know that really inspires creativity. When you have you open the cupboard sometimes and you've got 3 things left in there and you think, what am I going to create? And then you create something that's probably one of the best things you've created all month, because you've been forced into that kind of need to be creative with the small amount of things that you've got. And I think that's the way that a lot of the chefs have reacted to it, that necessity is the mother of invention, in that sense. And they've come up with great ideas because they've really believed and they wanted it to work as well. There's kind of this will to make it work, which is really important in achieving that.
I think increasingly over time, we're going to shift from aspiration and principle into sort of impact and measuring impact at not only a business and a brand level, but also an individual's level. So I want to just talk to you a little bit about what kind of impact we believe that EverGrain can ultimately have on the key things that we've been talking around sort of environmental impact and health. What kind of impact can EverGrain ultimately have?
So I can take that one, Charles. The answer is simply huge impact. Just to put it in perspective, you're talking about the brewer's spent grains, or as we say, brewer's saved grains, that runs around 9 million metric tons for the industry annually.
Wow.
And AB InBev has about 25% of that on hand. And our first large-scale facility is taking up just a fraction of that brewer's saved grains for now. So if you kind of dial that up, you can think about the millions of tons of greenhouse gas emissions that we'll be removing once we get the business up full scale. You can think about all the land that won't be added, because if you grow pea or soy, you need to actually cut down rainforests and plant new crops. Whereas with the brewer's saved grains, you don't have to do that.
Okay.
And you can also think about a very significant, again, like millions of gallons of water that you save in the processing as a result of the upcycling. Just to bring that down to the applications level, I think Nev talked a little bit about sports nutrition, what that means for sports nutrition, and specifically because our protein ingredient, it's called EverPro. It's got a super soluble profile. So it actually not only answers the plant-based protein kind of ask of consumers, it actually allows them to have a higher amount of protein per serving than they do with even a whey protein, and get the same, if not better, nutrition from that experience, from that ready to mix or ready to drink protein shake. So if you take out very pragmatically all the whey from the all these big tubs of whey that people drink and eat after they do sports, and you put in an upcycled or plant-based ingredient, that is a very easy way to think about all the greenhouse gas emissions that you're saving from a protein that comes from cows, which, as we know, are very methane intensive and not very good for the environment, as opposed to a protein that comes from something that is upcycled. So I think that's just an illustration of the type of impact that we can have, because the ingredient tastes great, because it's functional, because it meets nutritional needs for people in the world today.
And I'm also guessing that, linking back to the conversation we had just a few moments ago about application, when you consider the application and the range of applications, it makes it super relevant for all businesses, but some of the world's biggest food companies and retailers as well, introducing this into a whole, not just one product or a range of products, but across an entire portfolio. The impact can be huge, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's the practicality of what we're doing here, is that it's provision of macronutrients. You talk about protein. It's something that people need to get an adult needs to get minimum 40 grams of every single day. Fiber, adults should be getting minimum of 30 grams every single day. And most people in the Western world are not getting that from their diets. So what we call health by stealth is very, very relevant here, because you can introduce these macronutrients in a way that doesn't disrupt the taste or experience of eating that food. And you can just have, this wonderful intersection of sustainability and nutrition coming together. Yeah,
which is, and also taste and sensorial experience as well, which has got 100%. To ultimately be the three corners of the Holy Grail, right?
Yeah. And there's been a bit of a trend, particularly in the plant-based industry, where people feel they need to sacrifice themselves. They need to suffer to be plant-based or to be vegan. You don't have to. I mean, nature has been providing plants, fruits, and vegetables for millions, billions. I'm not sure what the number of years is, but all those years, that's what we've been nourishing ourselves with. So why would we need to sacrifice?
Yeah.
And I think it's also taking it beyond meatless Mondays as well. You know, it's that feeling consumers will kind of sacrifice one day of the week and say, oh, it's going to be a meatless Monday, which has become quite popular. But a lot of the retailers now know that if they increase the protein levels to the same level as the meat containing dish, that would give consumers confidence to buy more often than just Mondays.
Yeah.
And I think that's one thing that we can bring as well is, you know, having a super soluble ingredient fits well into sauces and so on, allows us to boost the protein in a sustainable way, which means the consumers have more confidence in giving that food to their families, when they have young children, and it has it has the same protein value as meat. Yeah.
Okay. I think I'm starting to think now as, you know, as an industry professional and as a processor, and thinking, okay, this is super exciting. Where are you in terms of your scalability journey? You know, what's being manufactured and where? And you know, if I'm in the business in the UK or Europe, how and where can I get my hands on this?
Yeah, I can take that one, Charles. You know, we've reached a new chapter in our journey, and we finally reached large scale. So just recently, we announced the grand opening ceremony of a large scale facility in St. Louis, Missouri, U.S. And this is after years of pilot scale, after years of excuse me, small scale. And so this facility will have the ability to produce over 7,000 tons of protein per year, and soon to be fiber as well. And so it can impact tens of millions of people, if not hundreds of millions of people. And that's just the start. So we have an aspiration to convert over 20 breweries over the next 10 years, so that around the world, right? So but it starts with this first facility, this first large scale facility, and you'll start seeing products in Q4 and in Q1 in the grocery stores in UK, Europe, and in the US.
Oh, that's very exciting. Wow. And if we want to, you know, if people listening to the podcast, they want to, you know, to get samples and to start to experiment, you know, who should they contact and how?
They can definitely contact me. I mean, I'll be willing to take any orders for samples, and but not just that, actually, not just supplying, you know, a bag of flour or a bag of ingredients. We've got teams based in Belgium who are real expert food technologists. They do a lot of application work themselves, come up with amazing prototypes, which can also be shown as well. So we don't just want to turn up with a bag of flour and say, over to you, good luck. We've got a lot of backup as well behind us, and we've got examples of how the ingredients can be used. And that's true for the US as well. We have an amazing R&D team in the US as well, who are constantly coming up with prototypes, which they share with the European teams. And so for us, it's not just, we're not an ingredients company in that traditional sense. We actually have quite a small range of ingredients in comparison to ingredients companies, but what we have is a lot of breadth of knowledge in terms of turning that ingredient into amazing food, whether that's sports nutrition or whether it's great bakery or whether it's great dishes. So yeah, we don't come just with a sample request. We come with a lot more than that.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing to hear, because the industry and the application of ingredients are formed around a whole set of norms, and I think, you know, shifting that thinking and reshaping the application of different ingredients in a familiar context is what it needs. So it's great that you're able to support with that. It's fantastic.
Maybe one shout out, Charles, to food developers everywhere, notably in the UK, is just to have a real hard look at the ingredients that they're using today.
Yeah.
And just to see if there is an alternative that is A, more sustainable, B, upcycled, or C, locally sourced, that they could put in, removing that, you know, more polluting and less ideal ingredient that they have today. I think food developers don't do that enough, just to look at what they have in their hands that they could change, just make a small change, and they can make a big difference.
And I guess I was, what is it and why is it there? What is its role? What is its purpose? Just because we've always put that into a thing, what do we need to do that? What's its role and purpose? I think it's a great starting point to consider all those norms.
Exactly, and just to be more purposeful in the way that we create food for people to enjoy.
I think one of the things that's come through as we've been talking is that you've come an incredibly long way in a relatively short space of time. And I don't know if you would, but I'd say you're still a fairly young business. So what's the, at the beginning of your journey, there feels like there's an awful lot more to do. So what is the vision? What do you see as kind of coming next on top of what you've already achieved?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, for us, it's a filling out of that product portfolio, particularly around fiber. So many consumers in the Western world actually get enough protein, so that's about making these products better. But many of us on a Western diet, so to speak, do not get enough fiber in our diet, and there's many reasons for that. And so we're going to increase our portfolio around that. In terms of, and maybe in the long term, we'll look at other additional plant protein sources, but we've got a lot of runway, Charles, with Brewer Spent Grain. We got a lot of grain to save. And as Jacqui mentioned, we have over 25% of the brewing industry's barley. And so we're going to focus on that. And then when we run out of saved grain, then we'll start looking at some other things too. But we definitely want to focus on improving our fiber ingredients.
Yeah, I mean, 2.5 million metric tons, and that's just your share. What you can't begin to imagine what that looks like in terms of a scale. That's a lot of grain.
Yeah, it's a lot of grain.
How many containers is that, Greg?
It's over something like 250,000 containers that if you line them single file, you could drive 6 hours.
Wow.
From start to finish.
That's a phenomenal amount. Goodness me. To all the hundreds of people that are listening to this podcast, I'm really interested and intrigued to know, what would you want them to take away from this, having listened to this for 30 minutes or so? What would you want them to do differently? What would you want them to take away?
Yeah, I think really kind of two things. I think the first one is hopefully you can see that, like, if EverGrain can be successful, if the brewing industry can be successful, then in your industry or in your company, you can do the same thing. So perhaps looking at waste, as Nev and Jacqui said, a little bit differently, right? And I would encourage everyone that's maybe has this idea that maybe hasn't just actioned on it or is in the journey themselves, is don't give up. I had many people look at me directly into the eyes and say, Greg, you are wasting your time. And we kept going, and through many different challenges. And I would encourage the audience and the members that are on a similar journey to keep going. And then I think Jacqui said it best: be thoughtful of the ingredients that you're incorporating in your product, and don't accept the status quo, right? And look for the products that are more sustainable, and because sometimes we underestimate the impact that we can make on the world, just within the food industry. And I think I think you'd be surprised how sometimes the chain reaction can follow just by one little small action can generate a large movement.
Nev and Jacqui, any thoughts on that? Any on the takeaways?
Yeah, I can go first. Yeah, so I think for me, it's just don't look at this ingredient as something which has been cast away or been kind of put aside. It's got a lot of value. It's probably, in many ways, it's the best thing about it is the protein and fiber. So don't look upon it as something which is, we're trying to use something which can't be used anywhere else. It's actually, we've taken the best bit, and it can really improve food, it can improve nutrition, it can improve well-being, and it can really help with sustainability. So don't look upon it, never call it waste, even though I keep calling it waste. Never call it waste. It's barley gold basically, and it's something which I hope in the future, you know, when I pick up a food product in the kind of retail world or in the food service world, that ingredient will be part of the declaration.
And probably in the not too distant future either, from what you were saying. Jacqui, your thoughts on that, on the takeaways?
Yeah, I'll just leave the audience with a sustainability takeaway, if I may, just regards the global greenhouse gas impact that the food sector is responsible for. It's about a quarter, but luckily, it's also the quarter that is the most easy to solve. And you know, the number one action that everyday people can take is to eat more plant-based foods. And I would say in that area, you don't have to compromise. People, brands, producers, enjoyers, lovers of food do not need to compromise. And I think that's something that we don't talk about enough. We do need to raise our voices. We do need to demand more of the brands that we love and say, listen, we just want good tasting plant-based food. And that's what we've been eating for millions, tens, hundreds of millions of years. And so that's what we want to eat today.
Amazing. Thank you. Listen, unfortunately, I feel like we could talk and keep talking. Unfortunately, that has to conclude this episode of the Food People in Conversation with Greg, Jacqui, Nev. On behalf of us all at the Food People and the In Conversation with audience, thank you so much for joining me today, for sharing the EverGrain story. It's been hugely inspirational. I'm sure everyone listening will agree, and really, really thought-provoking, a real eye-opener. It's been a real pleasure to speak to you all today. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. It's our pleasure.
Thank you, Charles.
Thanks, Charles.
So do join our TFP community for the details of our latest In Conversation with episodes, as well as the latest free-to-access food and drink trends foresight. Visit thefoodpeople.co.uk and complete your details at the footer of the page. On behalf of Greg, Jacqui, Nev and myself, thanks for listening to the Food People in Conversation with. Join with us in the trends of today and the foresight of tomorrow to shift the future of food and drink. And as always, I'll leave you with one question. How are you shifting the future of food and drink? Thanks for listening.